So welcome everybody, and I will do a brief introduction of myself and my co-facilitator today for this training. This is a webinar. We have two of these scheduled in the year, so this is part of our continued education piece that we do in the Coach Approach to Adaptive Leadership. And today we are going to be talking about the Coach Approach to Adaptive Leadership and really looking at this as a trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive method of supervision and engagement. The interesting thing about this training is we're actually going to be working with the creators of the Coach Approach to actually look at this in a lot deeper sense, to really look at doing this kind of continued education, or maybe even this idea of a Coach Approach 102, and really looking at the coaching model from a true trauma-sensitive method or trauma-sensitive model. So this is the kind of high-level overview, starts to put some of the pieces together for those that have done the Coach Approach, and also really helps us to have some dialogue and discussion, because although we have information to present, we also want to really hear from you all, how you're seeing this, how you're working this in a more of a trauma-informed way. So we want to welcome everybody with that. And with that, my co-trainer today, actually I probably should do. I'm Mark Durgan, the project director for the Pennsylvania Care Partnership. I should actually say who I am versus just talking. So Mary Garrett.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mary Garrett Eiton. I'm a Coach Approach associate and certified trainer, as well as a certified presence-based coach, and a proud social worker. So I welcome you all in, and as much as you're able or comfortable, I invite you to turn on your cameras as a presence practice and to create a intentional learning community together.
So as you're able to and can, we ask that you put your name and your role in chat. And also kind of thinking about it of how are you coming into today? Describing your mood as like the weather. So sunny, windy, thunderstorm, foggy. Probably foggy might be a good one today, just because of the time change. So just trying to get a glimpse of where people are and how they're coming in. So just put that in chat, or you can actually put it right out in the room as well. Kind of how you're coming in. We just really want to get a sense of where everybody is and how they are seeing the weather today, and the weather is themselves. So. Any thoughts on that? Venango County and Greene County, caseworker.
So can we just speak out, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm Sho, a co-founder of Spectrum Success 911. We are a nonprofit organization that supports families and individuals living with autism and mental health challenges. And I'm coming into the room like a rainbow after a storm. We just had a snowstorm Saturday, and I'm just feeling like there's a pot of gold underneath of me. And I'm just super excited about this event, about my day, and hoping I can bring, just a ray of sunshine into your lives. Thank you.
Awesome. I love the rainbow after the storm. All right, so we have Delaware County and Adams County, Venango, early childhood. Great. And seeing sunny, feeling sunny. Great. Philadelphia. Got a thunderstorm in. Okay. We'll keep an eye out for those thunderstorms. Keep the radar going for everybody.
And I just want to acknowledge that Elena is a service coordinator from early intervention. And I just said my ladder of inference jumped to South Carolina, because I was also with South Carolina today. So the way our minds work. Thank you, Elena.
So wouldn't surprise me if we didn't, Robin. Welcome. Okay. So our learning objectives today. we have a couple of them. One is to develop this understanding about how the coach approach it can be this valuable mindset to the human services field. We're going to refresh and reframe some of that and really kind of get that really solid in everybody's foundation. Learn about how the coach approach can be a trauma sensitive, and we call it a tool for supervision engagement. It's really maybe even a trauma sensitive way of being or a way of showing up. I also want to make sure that we're doing the transcript in case anybody needs that. So I did enable the live transcript for everybody. Okay. So then lastly, we have our understanding the importance of commitments and accountability and how these can really maintain strong teams. So when we look at this, and we'll share the slide deck with everybody as well in just a little bit, we really want to look at how the coach approach is really kind of moving us along, how we can use it, and like I said, ultimately how we're going to use this for accountability and how we're going to use this for our work in general. We're going to do a presence practice in just a moment. I think Mary Garrett's going to be doing our presence practice. So just want to put a little note on presence again. Presence is the most important part of the coach approach. It's interesting, I was out last Saturday night, went out to dinner, and I ran into a friend from York County who had done the coach approach to adaptive leadership. And I'm like, so how are things going? And her husband was there, and he's like, and she actually just turns to him and she just uses the term presence. He's like, so this is the coach approach guy. Because it was after that training, that was one of the biggest things that she had picked up was this idea of presence. How we can be present and how important that is. So really it's this idea of looking at the coach approach and how important presence is, especially when we're in these worlds of either online spaces or offline spaces or a million things to do. How can we take that breath, that moment to just bring ourselves back? And then ultimately, I think about this idea of presence, and it's also noticing when we're not present, giving that opportunity to recenter, to bring ourselves back in, so that we can really bring ourselves into the point where the person needs us to be. So with that,
Mark, I just wanted to add in, it's so important to be intentional. I now sign my emails, text messages, have a great day on purpose because I want to be intentional. I'm going to have a great day in spite of everything that's going on. So I just wanted to share that and leave that with everyone, being intentional and doing things on purpose.
Intentionality. Beautiful.
Okay, so I invite people to leave your cameras on, leave your cameras off for the presence practice, whatever makes you most comfortable. And so if we'll just take a moment and make sure that your feet are planted on the floor and take a deep breath to start. I invite you to lower your gaze or close your eyes or look anywhere that you would like, whatever seems right for you. And then just taking a couple deep breaths. Maybe lifting up your shoulders and letting them roll back and down. Maybe you need a little movement in your chair to this time in the afternoon and the day. Do what works for you and helps your body and your nervous system to calm and to come into presence. And then I invite you to bring your hand to your heart in honor of yourself, the work that you do, and the way you show up as leaders, and in all the ways that you are in community and in family. And just take a moment to feel your breath as it rises and falls from your chest and your belly. Maybe putting a hand on your belly and just feeling your breath as it fills you up and goes out, breathing out of your mouth. And if you notice a thought coming in, just to say thought, to name it and let it slide away. Or planning, or worry, just naming it and letting it move on. Bringing your attention back to the fact that you are sitting with your feet on the floor and that your breath is going in and out. And when you're ready, I invite you to come back into the room, into this intentional and meaningful place that we're creating together. Any noticings or thoughts that you want to share? All right, Mark, I'll turn it back over to you. You're muted.
I love this slide, and it is this one fact that we are all leaders. In the coach approach mindset, remembering we believe that individuals have a voice. They know a path in life or a way or an area that they need to get to. They have valuable input and feedback and are knowledgeable in where the challenge is, and that they have the ability to be knowledgeable and to solve these challenges. We know this about ourselves, we know this about others, and really believe that others have this same ability. So in this idea, if you remember that in this coach approach mindset, we say that every person can lead from any chair. It's our job as coaches and leaders to empower and bring those voices to the table to really help define and develop where they're coming from. So when we're looking at this, if you just, these are the Coach Approach course skill sets. Remember, the one foundation that we kind of talk about time and time again is this idea of presence and centering. We look at the idea of engaged listening, how we are listening, how we're showing up. We're moving away from that superficial, the self-referential, the fix-it mentality to really asking those questions that are engaging. We are not getting ahead of the person. We're listening to understand versus respond. And we're getting into this idea, remember, of clarifying and reflecting. Understand what is being said and what is not being said. Remember one of the great questions? I heard you say this. And kind of restating back what you heard. And I love to follow that up with, did I restate that correctly? Or did I hear that correctly? Gives the person that opportunity to really clarify and bring what we've said back to them. Then we're looking at this idea of what and how questions through the spirit of inquiry. We're refraining from why. We're refraining from those questions that are the yes and no, those closed questions, to really these questions that are what and how. Trying to get the person really deeper into the idea of inquiry and really where they are in all of this. And we ultimately talk about this idea of collaborative feedback, celebrating what they're doing well, giving true and honest feedback on what you could see they could do different. celebrating successes, being timely with it. And then ultimately this idea of anchoring accountability. So we say this idea of anchoring accountability, it's what that person is committing to. And then we're anchoring that accountability to what they've committed to. And we're asking questions. How can we follow up? How can we support you in that accountability? And not necessarily do the accountability for them. How can we support them in it? And then ultimately, we're looking at this as a modeling the behavior. The goal is all of our interactions, but as many interactions as we can. And noticing when we're not modeling. And just really noticing that. Then we have the coach approach process model. So for some of you that may have attended our last learning circle, we did talk about this. I just want to kind of touch it again just to share. There's a couple of brief or minor changes. So if you remember in some of the old coach approach model, this was the same: establishing presence, clarifying. The focus was the same. This is where it gets a little bit different, and it gets a little bit, I think, clearer. We're looking at this next step as identifying the change goal. We changed the language here because that's really, for me, has been this core cue point. That's like my question. What do you want to see change? What do you want to see different? What's the goal that you're trying to accomplish? So you're really trying to get that change goal, that thing that they're trying to see different or look at differently, or whatever the goal is that they're trying to identify or build, really trying to identify and bring it into a sense of really hammering it in there. And then you really look at this idea of exploring and discovering. We used to call this kind of the messy middle. When we really started to think about it, once you've identified that change goal, you're really then exploring and discovering all of the different options that could be part of that change goal. From there, they're creating the action plan, the steps that they're going to take, how they're going to do this, and then ultimately getting into this idea of gaining commitment and anchoring accountability. And we actually combined these two because it was really important to combine it, because we've also learned, we make a point now in saying this, we can't anchor accountability for somebody until they've committed to the step, to the action. So we have to ask for that commitment, and that's how we're going to anchor the accountability. And then we ultimately go back to establishing presence. So I want to put a little kind of pin there just before we move forward. Does that make sense now? Even though it's a little bit different, it's the same concept. It's really the same pieces. For me, it's been a lot clearer, and I just want to make sure that for others it makes sense. Seeing some head nods. All right. So then we get into our mindset. Again, we believe that everybody is capable and competent. Our role as leaders is to strengthen others and build their skills. And as our team becomes stronger, so are we. Remembering that there's often more than one right answer. They call it that gray. And if there is that one right answer, we're going to give it to them. If it's an A and B, what does the policy say? We're going to say that. Yet if it's a, how do I get to this, when there's a couple of options, now is when that's when we really look at there's often more than one right answer. And then we support critical thinking by asking questions so that people are developing their own solutions. I'm going to Mary Garrett, and then we're going to dive into
all right. So just that we're asking more questions and giving more direction. I think that Mark really already talked about this. And we're focused on strength and skill development over time. In addition to our role, often as supervisors or directors or leaders in any chair, is that we do have day-to-day instruction and oversight, but we really want to focus on creating growth and development. and offering, Mark already said this, but more grounded assessment and feedback with the intention of strengthening skills and having developmental improvement. And I think this is a really key point about the coach approach is we're really invested in people's growth and their adult development, because we do change and develop quite a bit as adults. And I know that the coach approach has been fundamental in my growth and change and the paths in my life that I have chosen since becoming in the process of becoming a coach approach trainer. And so I think this is just a really important part, that we really believe in each person's ability to grow, and that it's not static as we come into adulthood, which old theories told us it was, but now we know from much other research that it's not. All right, Mark, the next slide, please. So this may be new to some of you, depending on when you took the coach approach. And this is a way of looking at our core principles. And as we look at this within this trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive lens, I'm wondering, I just want to open it up to the room. What stands out to you? What seems most important here to you?
So I would say, this is Marguerite Willis. I would say understanding.
Yeah, what makes that to you, Marguerite, really important? Thank you so much for coming into the room.
I'm sorry, I'm here. Just my 14-year-old was back and forth. Listening. The first one like really jumps out at me, the listening.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we talk about what else? What else is coming up? What else were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say, like, a lot of times we kind of like listen to respond instead of like listening to fully gauge where people are coming from, or their perspective of what we're talking about. Normally we want to just respond off of what we know, instead of sometimes listening, make it a whole different point of view if we just like stop and listen.
Thank you so much. I was thinking about this the other day. I was a little stressed and I was walking with my husband and I was like, oh, I'm not listening to him, right? Like, so how do I become more present to be really in relationship? And then that ability to stop ourselves from just wanting to listen to respond, as you so eloquently said, Marguerite. Anybody else? What's standing out to you for you?
Hi, my name's Carol. Sorry.
No, Carol, go ahead.
Thank you. So I think it was Marguerite that was saying understanding, but then I'm thinking focus, which is the first item we have where we're present. There's intention and commitment. I thought I would switch to that one because that allows us to be present, listen with intent, and be committed to hearing what the person was saying so we could understand. I think the way they're in order makes sense. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. And Robin, you were going to add something too.
Well, I went to understanding as well. I had a, real situation this morning where, I believe that I'm focused and present and intentional and committed. However, today I went into this, and remember, my mood was a little windy today. Today I went into this engagement, I think more intent on being heard than listening. And it's just so important. These reminders are so important because I believe I went in, she's going to hear what I'm saying because this is important for our relationship. But I think I drove it more than the perspective taking is big. I think I drove the engagement more than listened. So I see where my shortcomings were and how they, went with my day and my mood and my yesterday. So it's important just to remember the perspective taking piece, why someone else has a different perspective and how important that is to a mutual relationship. So very timely today.
Yeah, and thank you so much for telling your story, right? Because that's why we do this, is so we can come together and remember it's so easy, right? To kind of it's human, right? To forget sometimes how we become present, just as you said, or the ability to take someone else's perspective, which all are super important to in being trauma informed and trauma sensitive. What else? Anybody else? Daisy.
Hello, sorry.
Hi.
Okay, so hi, welcome everybody. Sorry, I've just been so busy in the last meetings that I couldn't get in touch with everybody, but I'm glad to be here. So actually, I just got off the phone, which is why my video was off, with a client that there's a very soft-spoken client that speaks like this, and when you ask her if anything's okay, no, everything is just fine. No, so I'm at the point where she had a baby. I'm trying to help her apply for her emergency medical assistance and the child's medical assistance. But her living situation is that she's living in an apartment with her partner and somebody else in the apartment who his name is on the lease. So in order to apply for these benefits, you've got to provide all this proof, and she's not been able to get it. And I'm trying to like express the urgency with her, like if I can't help you beyond this point with the application, because it's contingent on your providing proof of residency, proof of income, proof of what you pay. So this poor baby is like about a month in, and I've not gotten. She has the person that lives there. His working schedule, it's always, well, he's not here yet, and he said he would have it for us, and he didn't have it. And I just got off the phone with her, and I was like, I'm trying to explain to her how she could ask him so that he understands the urgency of it, because this impacts her son, her newborn, and her directly. So at this point, I was like, okay, can you give him my number? I'll call him. Like, I didn't know what else to do except for like, let me intercede on your behalf now, and let me talk to him directly and explain what it is that is needed so that you and your child can get this benefit. So like, I was trying to like put as much as I can in her ball court with what she needs to do in order to get this done, but going on a month now. So, and she's so mild-mannered and so sweet. It's not like,
I can hear you, Daisy. Thank you for coming in and joining us. And I can hear that, that kind of tension in your voice. And so I invite you to just take a moment and come into presence with us. And I hear just your strong commitment to your work. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to move on. Can you see the screen, Daisy?
oh yeah, I can.
Wonderful. So one of the other things that you all might not have seen yet, this just got added to an updated Coach Approach curriculum, is what are the paradigm shifts in the Coach Approach? What are we really working on? And I really love this. I want to hear how it lands for you all, but that we're going from multitasking to monotasking. We have so much research that tells us that even though we believe we can multitask, we really can't. And so that presence, that focus, that intention at the beginning of the core principles, we're really moving from, and I think this is also really trauma sensitive and trauma informed. We're moving from not focusing on the past to focusing on the present and future. And this how and what questions, not why questions that put people on the defensive, are such an important part of this. And asking, not telling, right? Letting, using inquiry to let people come up with their own solutions and answers from, and this is, I know, can be a difficult one, to go from knowing to not knowing, because we're often promoted and for technical skills that we have and ability to answer questions. And so to move to not knowing can be difficult. And we certainly have lived through a lot of not knowing in the past 3 years, right? So we've been, as we call VUCA, a lot of uncertainty. And then when we're working with commitment, we're working from, and we just had this conversation in South Carolina this morning too, like not hovering over people, right? But getting commitment. What is that person committed to? And how do we support them in their commitment? Because as Mark said, we can't hold people accountable if we don't know what they're committed to. And when we're hovering over people, we're really telling them that we don't believe they're capable, right? And this partnering that you all talked about in the core principles, from fixing, like believing that people are broken and need to be fixed, to believing in people's growth and development and that everyone can grow and develop. And then this whole piece about presence, from reacting to responding from a place of presence and choice. All right, so this is I think a really great ad. And Mark, how about we go forward? So one of our favorite quotes, as you all may know from the coach approach, is Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist, a neurologist, and a Holocaust survivor who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And he said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space of presence that we create, is our power to choose our response. And in that lies our growth and freedom, our noticing and our choice. All right, Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Are going to talk a little bit about kind of reframing back to the setting, what does the brain science tell us? And this brain science really starts to tie us into where the trauma and trauma-informed approaches really start to take hold. We think about the brain science. The reality is we want to feel safe, seen, and heard. And as part of our leadership and how we're using the coach approach, we're using our idea of presence, our idea of seeing people and really having them be heard, so that their tension, their way is a little bit more level. They're able to hear things, and ultimately we're looking at this in a more trauma-informed approach, that we're really being there at the person, hearing what they're saying without interpreting too much, and just really kind of being with them through the journey. The other piece is we want this sense of control. We also know that when there is significant trauma in someone's life, that sense of control is limited. We want this sense of certainty, understanding where our future is. And that we have to understand that when we're looking at this from a trauma-informed lens, that sense of certainty may not always be there. Because a lot of times they might be living in the past, and how do we get into that kind of present and future mentality? And then ultimately, this is really important, that we want to see situations as fair. Knowing that life is not fair, how can we as leaders start to really bring this sense of fairness, and especially when we're having those shorter, smaller interactions, really hearing when things are not fair and acknowledging it. We may not be able to change fairness, yet we can acknowledge when it's not. Again, setting the context, if you remember this from the coach approach, we are hardwired to imagine threat, especially when we're under stress. We don't have a saber-toothed tiger walking around our corner or walking around the corner from us anymore. We have history. We have challenges. We have perception that are really kind of replacing that saber-toothed tiger. And just as a reflection, is giving that all of the things that people are feeling with threat, with trauma and everything else, our role is to really help them feel safe, seen, and heard. So this is just a refresher. We're not going to go into SCARF and the ladder of inference and VUCA. We just wanted to put these few key ideas out for the group. Remembering that we're hardwired for threat. We imagine the worst in order to protect ourselves. Very natural. We interpret modern threats through SCARF. If you remember, SCARF is status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. We jump to assume either safety or danger. If you remember the ladder of inference and all of the rungs, we're looking at the information at hand. There's way too much information. We're selective in what we take, what we grasp onto. We remove some stuff that is not important to us. We look at our culture, our history, all of these other things and make decisions. The great thing about the ladder of inference is when we start to realize that we don't have all the information or we're jumping, we can make that decision to stop. Or to at least realize that we don't have everything and then we can make a choice. And then ultimately, the world is unknowable and ever-changing. If you remember VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. The world is tough. It's our job as leaders to help ourselves and to help others make it through this challenging world. So with that, I think, Mary Garrett, you're going to talk a little bit about trauma.
Sure. So, just as we focus in the coach approach on being safe, seen, and heard, I believe fundamentally that the coach approach is a trauma-informed way of being, and certainly the skills, the high-level skills, and not anyway. The standards around coaching are pretty much about being trauma-informed. And so we really want to stress the importance of safety when we look through our trauma lens. And that's why being safe, seen, and heard is so important. And you all have already really eloquently talked, and thank you, Robin, for sharing your story about how we listen and our presence, and how we really think about, as Michelle talked about, being intentional about how we show up and how our state impacts the state of other people. And our culture and our history affects our perception of trauma and our life experiences and what's happened to us. And our trauma lens, when we put on our trauma lens, we can think and take perspective, as Robin, you so eloquently said, about someone else's perspective and where they might be coming from, and that they may have had challenges that we don't know about, because we certainly know that 60% of us probably in this room have at least one adverse childhood experience, and a good number of us have more than one. And that can really impact how we view the world and how we view fairness and safety and relationship. And effective coaching means that we are trauma aware, that we really seek to be trauma aware. Mark, the next slide, please. So in the coach approach and in changing the conversation, we really want to be working on supporting equity, inclusion, and honoring diversity in a trauma-informed approach. And we believe that the coach approach and coaching skills and mindset can really be used to create the space to establish trust in our interactions, and we don't have to have the same experiences in our life. This just came out today when Mark and I were training the coach approach this morning. Someone came out of a pair and said, wow, we may have differences, and we have so many similarities, right? And I remember this was before COVID, in person, and we were doing an adaptive leadership training. And I was paired with someone to talk about kind of our core values. and how our life experience has shaped those core values. And I remember we sat down to talk, and then she said, well, I never would have thought, looking at you, that you and I would have so many of the same life experiences. So it is in these conversations that we're able to discover in a really intentional way what we have in common, what may be different, and how we come together around that. You know, how are we intentional in our relationship building and in having conversation and engaged listening? And we're self-aware of our own culture and biases and hold these lightly, because as Mark talked about our ladder of inference, we have well-worn paths in our habits for how we interpret things. And so that ability to notice, to be present, to catch ourselves, to say, what am I missing? What assumptions am I making? What am I doing with that? And to stop that kind of feedback loop where we get caught and we jump the ladder is super important. And we can build by providing a way for people to be safe, seen, and heard through both a coaching mindset and skill set. We can build trust in interactions. And I think each of us who's here today has experienced that, right? In the coach approach, in our table groups, and in our conversations, and in the work that we do. Any thoughts here? How's it landing? I see some head nodding. And Mark, I think I'm turning it back over to you.
Yep. Come on. Oh. All right. There we go. So, Mary Gate had just mentioned culture a little bit, and I just wanted to tie culture and this idea of a cultural worldview into this idea of trauma and being trauma informed. So when we look at this idea of a cultural worldview, we have to consider the fact that society's beliefs and customs and habits, conventions, humanism, lore, science, all of the things that makes us humans are shared by all or almost all members of a group. Much of this is transmitted from generation to generation, really ingrained from where we were brought up with. And when we think about how this is transmitted from generation to generation, for some that have done the trauma-informed workshops, you can even look at this idea of transgenerational trauma and how things are passed into us, even without the intent. We have to remember that these structures and these things really shapes our beliefs, is applicable to diverse populations and groups, and ultimately, over time, as we really start to understand the various cultures, the various worldviews that are coming into play, how we can start to really align this with trauma and being trauma informed. Many of you may remember or have seen this iceberg. And yeah, this really focuses on culture. And you really kind of see what's above the world and then below. Much of what we have talked about in culture and everything else is above. It's our dress, it's our skin, it's our accents, it's our ethnicity, it's our race. Those are all things that are on the outside that we can see. When we really start to look at our culture and how this aligns with trauma and being trauma informed, it's all of those inner pieces that start to tie in and really align and bring us into a fuller picture of what's happening. Looking at how that person is interacting, their face, their eyes. This way we talk about the importance of cameras and really noticing and being with one another. We look at this idea of emotional response patterns. Every time I talk with somebody, they break down. What might be happening? I have an idea of what might be happening, could really relate back to their culture, could be relating right to something that's happening right now. I have ideas, yet we need to ask, get clarity, get understanding so that we can really understand everything that's happening. We look at this idea of culture and beliefs from perceptions about mental health, illness, and disability. All of these things can really sit very heavy with somebody. And it's our job in this idea of being trauma informed. How do we explore some of this to understand maybe what's happening with the person without doing therapy, we're not talking about therapy, we're really talking about what questions, how can we process with the person to get them to the point where they're looking at their whole self and how they want to move forward. And understanding that that trauma piece is there, yet it is also there to help support them, and really kind of help drive what we're seeing and how we're going to move forward. So I just wanted to just give a sense of how does that trauma piece and culture align, or how are you seeing that? Are you seeing how our culture can really align with our how we want to show up to be more trauma aware?
It all makes sense. It all makes sense to me, Mark.
All right.
You know, from my experience with the coach approach training I've already had, we had one person really bring some clarity to culture when she said in her culture, I don't think I'll forget this, and that's a good thing. In her culture, eye contact between a man and a woman was so different. A man didn't look at a woman to ask a question because it was part of their culture. So it's just a good example, I think, of how unaware we are and how we have to become more aware of all of these differences in cultural, or linguistics needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
oh, go ahead.
That really resonated with me, that example.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're saying that, it really kind of goes into this idea of like, if the person is not looking at you or is not this, like, what might be happening beneath the surface?
Right. And
to explore.
I think the point, that this person was making, that it wasn't a matter of disrespect. It was a matter of culture. So, for us to be present and listening, it's so important not to take that in as a personal measure that they don't care or that they're not listening or engaging, because it was just that culture for that man not to look at that woman. And this, this was going way back in that culture, but still the same. You could adapt it to principles today, probably.
Yep, absolutely. All right, Mary Garrett.
So, we believe that supporting others through a coaching model is super valuable, and that the mindset and skill set are really important in our interactions. And as Mark says, changing the conversation, right? Really believing in people's capability and creating a place where people can be safe, seen, and heard, and where they can solve their own problems and develop and grow. And believing that each person is capable and doesn't need fixing, right? It can also be stressful. And so as people in social services and human services, we can experience stress from continual work with clients and in systems. And we have to maintain and understand our own emotions. And sometimes that is easier than other times, right? And Marguerite is saying balance is the hardest part of my job. Yeah, thank you, Marguerite, so much for sharing that. And it is that maintaining a work-life balance when we are in service to other people can be extremely difficult. And so how do we look at this through a trauma-informed lens and our understanding of ourselves? So SAMHSA's definition of trauma is this. We talked about safety, being trustworthy and transparent. What does it mean to be trauma-informed? And we're going to move really specifically into talking about this for a little bit in an overview type of way. And that the other principle is that people receive peer support in a trauma-informed way. And so how are we doing that with one another, with our employees, with people in other aspects of our lives, and with the people that we support. Collaboration and mutuality, that partnering, right? We're not the expert, we're partnering together, empowerment, voice, and choice. And what is Mark started the conversation about, and we've been having a conversation about, what are cultural, historical, gender issues, impacts of racism, impacts of being othered, discrimination in our communities, where people are living in community and the resources they have, how do those impact everything? And so that being trauma-informed, it includes looking at that lens. And just to kind of give a definition of trauma that many of you may already know, is that it feels like getting shocked, right? So when someone experiences trauma, it's like touching a hot pan or being exposed to an electrical jolt that you can't get away from, and that threatens your sense of life and safety in a fundamental, deep way. And that toxic stress is sustained stress or trauma over time, like a loud piercing noise that you cannot get away from and you cannot control. And what we know is that this has impacts both on our sense of being and on our brain wiring. And there's a lot that we can do to heal, and relationships are really such a key healing place. And so by being trauma informed and using coaching skills with other folks, we can support healing and relationship. So, and then our responses, right? Our brain-based responses to trauma are fight, flight, freeze, or capitulate. And capitulate is when we make agreements for our safety, to stop it, whatever it entails, to feel that we have some control or that we can stop something. So that has been added more and more as we learn more about trauma and the neurobiology of trauma. And it really goes back to that brain science that we learn as part of the coach approach also. So defining terms that are really important for us as helping professionals, really important. Compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue happens when we are physically and emotionally exhausted, and it impacts our ability to empathize or to feel compassion for others. And it's often described as the negative cost of caring, or it's described as secondary traumatic stress. And so what we know more and more about brain science is that compassion and empathy live in our upstairs brain, in our prefrontal cortex. And when we're under a lot of stress, we have less access to our prefrontal cortex also. And so our ability to be compassionate and to be empathetic can get impacted. And empathy fatigue is the emotional detachment brought about by prolonged emotional exposure. And that's what causes our fatigue or our burnout. Sometimes that when we are having a sense of other people's experiences is separate from our own, right? And really empathizing with that and standing in someone else's shoes or trying to perspective take. We, depending on where we are, that can cause some empathy fatigue and cause us to burn out. Or when our life, as Marguerite said, can get really out of whack or unbalanced, we have less ability to access our presence, our intentionality, and our prefrontal cortex, where our empathy and our compassion lie. And then another definition is vicarious trauma. It's when there's a transformation in our view as helpers, our inner sense of identity and existence, that when we listen over and over again to really difficult traumatic experiences of others. And we know that in the helping profession, there are a number of us that actually have had significant traumatic experiences. And so that can make us more vulnerable. And there's so much that we know about presence and caring for ourselves that helps us to care for that part of us, right? So we have so much new research. How's this landing for folks? What's coming up?
So I had wanted to comment on you were saying about the peer support. And my thought is taking the lead as a coach in a peer role is to actually take the back seat, moving into a co-discoverer position and allowing the person that you are supporting to actually take the lead. One of the techniques that I use is to allow that person to identify where I'm supposed to be. Am I listening? Do you want feedback? Do you want a response? You know, do you want me to take the role of a sounding board? When we identify what that person needs and know the place that we are going to be in, then we don't trigger that individual that we're trying to support, because we're doing what it is that they need. We become what they need. So we don't want to per se take the lead as a coach, but take the lead in the support role as a secondary person and not so much in the first tense.
Michelle, that is so beautiful. And I love the emphasis on what hat almost do you want me to wear, right? Like, what do you need right now from me? So that we're clear about what people need and how we can best support them. And then we can put on that hat, right? And fulfill that role, leaving the other person at choice and in control, and how important that can be. Thank you so much. Anything else? I'm gonna, Mark, you're up. Are you up? Mark and I are just ping-ponging back and forth here.
All right. So we're gonna watch a brief video, I think. Oh. I thought. All right, hold on a second. Where is my video? All right, I will find that video in just a second. So we're going to watch it in a second. I'm just going to find it real quick. So with that, what we're talking about here is, for some reason, my video all of a sudden is not there. I'm playing. We want to talk about the coach approach and how this is trauma informed. So we're going to watch a brief video real quick. Let me just pull it up here. And what we want to do is kind of this idea, going back to this idea that all people are hardwired for threat. Looking at the idea that, oh, here we go. Copy. That trauma impacts our brains in very, very different ways. That we are also looking at this in coaching. We want to move people from their downstairs brain to their upstairs brain. So we talk about this, and you'll see this in just a second as soon as I pull it up and get it showing for you. I just can't find my screen here. There we are. And then ultimately how we're going to look at this is the importance of connecting how we model the coach approach. So I'm going to bring another screen over and let you all see this. My apologies, for some reason, like I said, the piece just did not go right.
So I want to talk for a minute about how to...
Okay. Beautiful. Sorry about that. Share, and here we go.
teach the brain. So I want to talk for a minute about how to teach the brain. One of the really important things that we know in trauma is that when we help people understand the injury trauma creates in the brain and help them understand how that impacts the way they respond to other events in the world, it really helps them and their families move forward in their healing. So lots of people have given ways to teach the brain. As a practitioner myself, I've taken a lot of the models from Dr. Dan Siegel, taken models from the Hahn Foundation for teaching in the optimistic classroom, and looking at some of the things Ledoux has done, and put them together and really challenged myself and folks that I educate about practicing really teaching the brain. So when I explain this to teenagers, I start with the hand model, okay? And I start by explaining that we're going to talk about the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain that everyone has. Formally, this is called the limbic system, and this is called the cerebral cortex. But what we're going to talk is downstairs brain and upstairs brain. So in your downstairs brain, this is where fight, flight, or freeze lives, okay? When threat comes at you, your body has 3 reactions it can make. It can fight, it can run away, or it can stay very still until the danger's gone. That's what this brain does, okay? This part of the brain. What's up here, the upstairs brain, its job, among many other things, is to solve problems, to help you calm down, solve problems, okay? And to tell the downstairs brain, I got this. We're gonna be okay. There's another solution. So what happens a lot of times to kids who've experienced trauma is if you think about these like muscles, because you've gone through a lot of threat, this downstairs part of the brain's been doing push-ups your whole life, okay? So this part of the brain's really strong. The part of your brain that solves problems hasn't had as much exercise because you've had to be really strong to be a survivor, a thriver. So what happens is that the brain gets what I call emotionally hijacked. This downstairs brain comes up on top of this brain, it takes over, okay? So the downstairs brain's in control. And so you fight, you run, you freeze. The only things that work when you're down here are things that calm you down. So we call them self-regulation skills. And that happens from connection. Somebody talking to you, helping you breathe, helping you feel your body calm down. Once that happens, then the upstairs brain can come back, and then you can solve problems. So that's how I try to explain to teenagers the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain, and what happens.
So, just wanted to give a moment of reflection. If we go back to the slide and really start to think about what you were saying about that kind of downstairs brain, the upstairs brain, and how we need to bring that sense of calmness, that sense of being, to stop that upstairs, so kind of from that downstairs from going above that cerebral cortex. How can we can use the coach approach, grounding, being present, being there for the person, to really help de-escalate, to bring that person into a sense where they can start to calm that flight, fight, or freeze and be present to start to think about things in hopefully a little bit different way. The importance of connection is I think for me was the biggest piece there. And how when we really think about the coach approach model, how it is about connection and bringing individuals into the same room. Really a great video. I think for me it always has really helped explain how that brain works, and I think for me has really helped place it into a more coaching modality. So the other piece that we're looking at is this idea of the ACEs. So I know many of you are very, very much familiar with ACEs, and Mary Garrett had just talked about it a few minutes ago. Thinking about this, that trauma will show up in different ways in everyone's lives. Experiences we have impact how we see the world. Again, if you look at this kind of adverse childhood experiences tree in the adverse environments, almost really goes back to this idea of what we can see above the ground and below the ground, or the iceberg. And when we look at the culture piece, in workplaces, our responses to those that we work with are often, those individuals are often impacted by ACEs, and we don't know. Coaching does not address trauma in a clinical approach, yet it does address the person to help us be with them, asking good questions to really get a sense of where they're coming from. Coaching is about being present and supporting those around us. And then ultimately, as a leader, it's our responsibility to acknowledge the experience of others and to learn how we can support them. So how we learn how to support them is we ask questions. We ask for information about what we can do to bring them into this sense of safety, being seen and heard, so that they can really start to help make decisions. So again, if you remember, like 64 or about 2/3 of adults have at least one ACE. ACEs are responsible for work absenteeism, for costs in healthcare, emergency response, mental health, criminal justice involvement, challenges in our lives. And we can use the coach approach model to help bring that person's, we're not reducing their ACE score. We're really just about how we're going to really kind of bring up more conversation and bring that person into a sense of where they want to show up and how they want to be. So we also look at this. This is actually adapted from the FREDLA peer support training program, and we do a lot of work. Actually, we're trying to get family peer support embedded in Pennsylvania, and this was actually, like I said, adapted from from the FREDLA, which is the Family Run Executive Directors Leadership Association. FREDLA looks at effective ways for trauma-informed supervision, and we look at this as very much aligned with the coach approach. So we're supporting these individual growth. We're unifying with your team. So really being with the team, hearing them, building that sense of community, a sense of belonging. We're asking for feedback from others about what's happening and feedback from themselves. We do expect growth. We expect individuals to build accountability. We expect individuals to reinforce their own potential, and using the coach approach, we're helping to identify those additional potentials. We're working to instill autonomy where individuals can make those decisions on their own. We're sharing continuously and providing certainty, a sense of where they are. We're optimizing ownership. That's that idea of commitment. What are you willing to commit to and take this on your own? And then ultimately, we're building and reinforcing relationships. Building and reinforcing relationships. And the other piece, if you really look at this actually goes back to the other slide. If you remember, we talked about some of the SAMHSA ideas of kind of what the coach, or what the kind of core elements of trauma informed were, and we actually crosswalk it here with the coach approach. So from SAMHSA's piece on safety, we look at the coach approach of using and focusing on being safe, seen, and heard, trustworthy and transparency, being present, responsive, providing the sense of certainty, peer support, You are supporting peers. We call peers as your coworkers, your family, your friends, those that you work with, those that you're even supervising, including youth and family, to make their own decisions. They talk about coaching, listening and reflecting and asking questions. They talk about the idea of collaboration and mutuality. More discussion and dialogue. We are not just directing, we're opening things up. This idea of empowering voices and choice. We support the empowerment of ownership of decisions, and ultimately this idea of cultural and historic and gender issues. In coaching, we honor the individual, their culture, their history, and we work with them at their level to bring them to a sense of commitment, to bring them to a sense of accountability. It takes time. Yet, and we really look at this, I think we can really see that how being trauma informed truly does align with coaching and leadership.
All right. So thank you so much, Mark. We're going to move you into table groups for about 7 minutes. And Mark, I'm ready to start it. Oh, I'm echoing. Am I echoing in the room? Oh, so I have it ready to go. So my one request is that please, when you go into your table group, to turn on your camera if you're able, or to unmute if you're not able to turn on your camera, so that you can be present with the folks in the table group. So what we're going to talk about is the implications of trauma on your workforce. And we want to give you time, and then we'll come back into the room and we'll finish our time together today in conversation, in a larger groups conversation about this as you come back and report out what you find in your idea. Thank you for people for turning on your cameras, and if you're not able to, just to turn on your mic as you go into your breakout rooms. All right, we'll see you back in 7 minutes.
Oh. All right, so welcome back. We have
Welcome back, everybody.
We have a few minutes, so we want to definitely give you all some opportunity to provide any reflection, implications of trauma, and how you might be using the coach approach.
Mark just put the evaluation in the chat.
Well, I will start. So Andrea Brown, we talked about like different ways, but the main thing, like at the very end, we started talking about self-care. And it's like how as agencies, we push our employees to do a lot of self-care, and how it has impacted also turnover. So we want our staff to take care of themselves, but yet we have the turnover and they can't take care of themselves. So we're possibly re-traumatizing our staff. And it also carries over to possibly re-traumatizing for our clients. It's just kind of that continuous method of what are we doing? And then also doing that change of culture. Like it's not going to do it overnight. Like we have to change the way that our whole agencies look at trauma, looks at coaching, looks at everything. And it's a process, and just having that buy-in all the way across the board.
Yeah, Andrea, I so appreciate what you're sharing, and the reality that we're in, right? With staff shortages, and also like, how does that impact us and our ability to take care of ourselves and the ability of our staff? How is it impacting our clients? And if we really want to use the coach approach and be really trauma informed, it requires a real shift in how we operate, is what I hear you saying. How does that land? My reflection back to you.
Perfect.
What else?
I think our group mostly revolved around basically kind of the, we'll say, longer effects of trauma, mostly from the pandemic, the working from home, the how at first it was actually kind of nice how we could rebound so easily, that we could, be out of the office but still be getting our work done. But how after a while, the isolation, the lack of I still meet with people via these virtual conferences, but I think the team aspect suffers a lot when you're not, at least once in a while, having actual social gatherings. And then also the like uncertainty of, like, a lot of us are now full-time telework or whatever, so we have at least that certainty. But is this ever going to be over? Like, I remember the first couple of years, I at least had the thought, man, as soon as this is all over, we can do all these things. And now getting into year 3, you're like, this might not end. Like, this might be how we live now forever. And yeah, I don't know how I feel about that.
We have been in a VUCA world on steroids, and it's created such enormous shifts in the way that we work and interact. And so, how do we want to deal with that, right? Brandon, I hear you saying like the isolation and the community that happens when we work together.
Yeah, and also like the roller coaster of, when things start to, and the numbers start to dip, you get a little bit freer, you go out and see people a little bit more, and then you see the next one coming, and there's no set rhyme or reason to this. You don't know if you're going to have a few days, a few weeks, a couple months, or if, as this one's going down, we're going to get another variant, and we're like, oh, well, here it goes again. So like I've had to do things like, start finding hobbies and things I enjoy that involve being outdoors, that are more solo, because I have to be able to look forward to something no matter what happens with that, because that I can't control. So I can at least control certain things about how I respond to it. And that's it.
And for some of us, it's been a real trauma, and the people that we support, right? For some of us, it hasn't, but for some of us, it really has been a trauma. And there's so much we don't know yet. What else as we close up? I think we have just a couple more minutes. Oh, we're almost really at time.
Yeah.
Our group talked about like the trauma burnout as well, and how that kind of carries over into home life as well as our relationships at work. And then eventually we did kind of come back into that self-care and discussing how we support each other or our family members through that, and how that's a big component of making it through that trauma. I think we could have talked for much longer, but that's kind of where we're at now.
Yeah. Well, I want to acknowledge that you're coming in with so much to talk about at the end, and I wish we had more time. Certainly, I have a few minutes to stay on if other people want to stay on and have more of a conversation about it. And I do believe that these ways of being really intentional about how we care for ourselves in the long term is so important. Shelby, I really hear you saying that, and I want to honor that. And our ability to regulate ourselves, which Brandon, you talked about, is so important for ourselves and who we interact with. And to acknowledge that it has been really challenging.
All right.
So Mark left we really encourage you to fill out the evaluation. It really helps us. And if anybody wants to stay on or wants more conversation or support, I can stay on for about 15 more minutes.
All right. Thank you all, and have a fantastic day, and look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you. Good.